You have the power to raise an army. Use it.
Your father didn't believe in revenge.
Hell, I do.
In the grand scheme of things, I never thought Dune Part 1 was anything special outside of its technical achievements. I mean, damn, that movie looked about as good as a movie could look. And if good looks are all Dune Part 1 set out to achieve, then mission accomplished. But Dune Part 1's major focus on excellent world building and great cinematography forgot the major facet of what separates good movies from great ones, and that's mainly character building. The fact that the lead character of Paul Atreides was played by the twink Timothee Chalamet didn't help matters. In the first Dune, he didn't sell me as someone I could imagine myself being, mainly because of his feminine qualities and cracking voice. This is supposed to be the one who will lead armies.
Roaches, and I'm having to kill them with my own bare feet. Ew, 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 ew.
Oh, God. Paul Atreides in Part 1 was a shallow, one-dimensional character who seemed about as flat as Timothy's biceps. A character that moped from scene to scene, always looking sad over cliffs or sand dunes, when he wasn't delivering lines like they were made of bricks. Not exactly what you're looking for in a messianic figure who is destined to save the universe.
I saw you lying dead. Fallen in battle. Felt like if I had been there, you'd be alive.
Denis Villeneuve neglected to read the cinematic landscape, failing to try and figure out why the character of Paul Atreides has been plundered and ravaged more times than the island of Sicily since the books have been released. He didn't bother to find out the way to separate Paul from his counterparts like those of Luke Skywalker, Neo, and Harry Potter. In fact, aside from the scene stealing Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica and Jason Momoa playing Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho, most of the characters in Dune Part 1 were one note and boring to watch. Zendaya is the most overrated actress of her time, and she had about 5 minutes of screen time in the first Dune. All of her scenes were shot in beautiful slow motion to the point I thought she was trying to sell me perfume.
I can. We will. Idol.
The new fragrance, Lancôme.
Denis Villeneuve had 3 directions for her: stare, laboriously stare, and turn, and stare. Every scene in Dune Part 1 seemed to end quietly, with barely a grain of interest that compelled the audience to move forward in the story. The only thing that seemed to do the trick was the next shot was more beautiful than the last. No world seemed lived in, no house fleshed out, no clear understanding on the political maneuverings unless you had the book sitting at your side. And I always said, if the audience needs the book to understand what the movie's about, your movie is. Therefore, with the multiple problems I had with Dune Part 1, it all boiled down to one thing for me. Dune was mediocre. It was Two-Face from Seinfeld. In some light, it was just downright ugly. And then Dune Part 2 came out and slapped its big 300-meter-long worm dick down, leaving a cavernous imprint in the desert that is the current cinematic landscape. It manages to retroactively fix some of the problems in Dune Part 1 without sacrificing the good, and in the meantime ratchets up the tension through its characters. But does that mean Dune Part 2 is an instant classic?
Maybe one day we'll find out.
I'll keep the plot relatively spoiler-free. Dune Part 2 starts right where Dune Part 1 dropped us off, like a couple of unwanted ginger children. Paul Atreides, played by Timbo Chevrolet, and his mother Lady Jessica, played by the ever-so-talented Rebecca Ferguson, joined the Fremen of Arrakis after House Atreides was ambushed and slaughtered by House Harkonnen on the orders by the Emperor. Javier Bardem is Stilgar, the leader of the Fremen, and convinced Paul is the Messiah the prophecies foretold. As much as he believes this, not everyone in the tribe feels the same way, including Paul himself and the woman of his dreams, Chani, played flatly by Zendaya. More on her later. Paul, seeking revenge on House Harkonnen, goes native as the desert dancer he always wanted to be. Twinkle Toes here also tames sandworms and for some reason gets lost in Zendaya's eyes. Meanwhile, Lady Jessica, in a Fremen ritual, drinks the poison from a sandworm and is transformed into the Reverend Mother, who can now talk to her unborn child. Trust me, this will all make sense in the context of the movie. Her motherly approach has been shed for something more ice cold. Ferguson easily conveys all this, mostly with inscrutable yet piercing gazes. No easy feat for any actress. Yet the more spice Paul huffs, the more visions he has. If he continues down the path his mother and the Bene Gesserit have set before him, the path that Stilgar and many others want him to walk, it will lead to complete catastrophe. When Paul is not tripping balls in the middle of the desert, he's leading guerrilla fighters to destroy Baron Harkonnen's spice harvesters. The score is like 150-2 before Baron fires his overacting Dave Bautista of a nephew and replaces him with the much more nuanced and complex brother Austin Butler, or as they say in the movie, Feyd Routha. It is announced that Feyd is a psychopath, and when you first meet him, Austin Butler plays his part that borders on melodrama with a side of angsty emo kid. He tests the sharpness of his knife's blade with his tongue before slicing the throat of a slave. You listen to My Chemical Romance one time, and this is what happens.
Life is pain. Life is only pain.
But as soon as Butler dials the character back in subsequent scenes, he is as phenomenal as he is dangerous. As the House of Harkonnens try and get their shit together, we are introduced to Christopher Walken, who plays Emperor Cowbell, a role he is severely miscasted in. From the look of his costume all the way down to the way he delivers his lines, it feels like Christopher Walken was told this was a parody film. His character is not fleshed out, nor is his presence felt in the grand scheme of things. It is more about his daughter, played by Florence Pugh, who, like Lady Jessica, is also part of Ben Gesserit's grand scheme.
Well, duh. What part of sudden death didn't you understand?
And so, with everything at stake and in full motion, Paul has to make his choice on believing whether or not he's the chosen one, a mantle he outright refuses for most of the movie. Rarely do you see the reluctance of a hero play into the tension of the film anymore. Every time Paul fails to believe in who he really is comes at a cost. But if he fully embraces his path in becoming the Messiah, will that lead to a much greater tragedy?
Let me tell you something. I'm from Buenos Aires, and I say kill them all! Yeah! Oh yeah! Yeah! Oh yeah!
To be completely honest, I didn't think Timmy the fruit-banging Chalamet could convince me that he could lead a military and become the religious figure the story needed him to be. And maybe that was the magic in casting Timbo as Paul. He sheds the mopey persona that haunted him in the first Dune and manages to play the reluctant hero with the fate of the universe on his shoulders pitch perfect. His character is given a bit more dynamic by caring deeply for those around him, and at the same time wrestles with becoming a vengeful and dangerous messiah. Josh Brolin returns as Gertie, and if it isn't his No Country for Old Men co-star Antoine Chigurh over here stealing a scene, it's Brolin, both of whom fully buy into their characters, something that is sorely lacking in modern Hollywood these days. Denis Villeneuve and cinematographer Greg Ferguson managed to outdo themselves this time around. Greg Ferguson is becoming a master of the moving image, much like Roger Deakins, Haskell Wexler, and Vittorio Storaro before him. The scenes he shot in the desert rival those of Freddie Young's work in Lawrence of Arabia. He's starting to reach high water marks and surpassing him in some areas. The outstanding imagery is something you come to expect from a Villeneuve movie. There is a seamless blend of CGI and practical effects mixed with some of the best cinematography in modern movies. Dune Part 2 beats anything coming out of the MCU with its cotton candy color palette and worthless effects these days. When we visit House Harkonnen, we're treated to gladiator-style combat shot in nearly black and white, and this immediately connects their world as cold and cruel, but not without some sense of honor. While the first Dune felt like 2 hours of prologue with 20 minutes of actual story, Dune Part 2 manages to show that these worlds are lived in while letting the plot unfold. Unlike Dune Part 1, most of these scenes end on interesting notes that make you want more. But not all is perfect in the world of Dune Part 2. For starters, much like the first Dune, pacing was an issue. Dune Part 1 felt like it was watching a worm crawl over hot asphalt, dry and not much happening. However, in Dune Part 2, the tempo was all over the place. Sometimes the pace was perfect, other times it felt like you were never going to get out of a scene, other times the movie felt like it moved so quick it was speed shitting through its own world. Dune Part 2's pace is a teen first learning how to drive. It smashes down on the gas before pumping the brakes too hard. Before the audience can remove its head from the dashboard, Villeneuve is hitting the gas again before driving into a fucking wall. Massive time jumps in the narrative are also felt. Some characters fast travel for no explicable reason. Case in point, one of Stilgar's trials for Paul is to traverse miles of desert and come back. Chani watches Paul leave on his journey. 10 miles later, she's waiting for him. Another moment is Paul's refusal to go south, opting to stay north to avoid fulfilling his destiny. 10 minutes and little explanation later, he's in the south drinking blue worm cum and tripping balls. Also fast traveling is Paul and Chani's relationship. The love story story between the two seem hollow and a predestined plot point rather than organic. There is a severe lack of chemistry between these two actors. In a pivotal moment of their relationship towards the end of the movie, Chani and Paul are divided, a separation that just rang untrue to me. It's a defining moment that should have happened earlier, if it needed to happen at all. I know Zendaya is now the new flavor of the month Hollywood keeps pushing on the audience, but when she's not out there looking like C-3PO with his asshole hanging out, she's still an overrated actress. This time around though, Villeneuve gave her a monumental task beyond stare, laboriously stare, and turn and stare. He now added 3 more looks that are nearly identical: gleefully smile, sarcastic smirk, and utter disgust. Utter disgust was used most. Zendaya is the female equivalent to Derek Zoolander, and Florence Pugh is her Hansel.
What say we settle this on the runway? Han Solo.
Also, fast traveling along with time jumps and forced relationships is the major climactic battle. This happens far too quickly and easily for our heroes. I don't think we even lost one minor good guy in this scene that uses a combination of hand-to-hand combat, air-to-ground assaults, 300-meter sandcocks, and nukes. It honestly felt like once the fighting started, Denis Villeneuve rolled his eyes and tumbled his fingers over each other, telling the story to get on with it. And Villeneuve has recently come out and said he has no interest with dialogue in movies, explaining further, saying that it's not the dialogue that makes movies memorable. Well, we can tell, Den, because every time a character talks in Dune Part 2, it was to vomit exposition about someone's character or about the plot. Oddly enough, though, Dune Part 2 does drop a badass line of, "May thy knife chip and shatter." Something tells me the other screenwriters protested Den Dog to keep this line in the movie. Lastly, I know this is sacrilegious to say, but it has to be said, and I don't give a shit. Hans Zimmer's score is honking at me. He honks his instrument so loud he's trying to blast me into the back of the room. Since inception, he's more of a certified noisemaker now than a musician, smacking his cock and balls down on a keyboard, honking and blasting away louder than any ship that can explode in this movie. So where does this leave Dune Part 2 as a whole? Well, the short answer is, it's good. It retroactively fixed some of its predecessor's issues, while ultimately becoming a joyful cinematic experience. But I do fear the current desert of shit that is modern day cinema will arbitrarily elevate Dune Part 2's status, even if only for a short moment. I don't expect anything less, when for the last 14 years movies have been divided down to their least common denominator in Hollywood's attempts to offend no one and include everyone. But the more good films like Dune Part 2 are watched in the theater, the more our cinematic landscape can change back to the way things were. A chance to sit down for 2+ hours with total strangers and share an enjoyable journey together, almost making it a religious experience. And this right here is enough for me to believe in the power of Dune. If you enjoyed this video, you go ahead and smash that like button. While you're done doing that, hit the subscribe button. And then after that, share this with your friends, family, people you hate. Maybe you don't like my content and just want to waste somebody's time. Do it. Share it. Thank you. It is much appreciated. I'm out of here.
May thy knife chip and shatter.